So for our second segment, we want to talk about Trump's economic fucking insanity. Because the shit he's pulling is both monumentally stupid and reckless and totally self-defeating.
Yeah.
So I do want to give a little bit of like a timeline of like his tariff policies, because I think it's important to recognize just how impractical this is as a method of accomplishing anything, because it's so erratic and it's kind of like it would be impossible to follow. It's like it's not the way that any serious person would ever implement policies that affect like one of the largest economies in the world. So let's just go through this real quick. February 1st, Trump signs an executive order imposing tariffs on goods from Canada, Mexico, and China. You know, three of our closest trading partners, one which we have an adverse relationship with. 2 days later, on February 3rd, he says that the tariffs on Mexico and Canada would be delayed for a month. So, like, already flip-flopping. A month later, March 4th, he announces a 25% tariff on all goods imported from Canada and Mexico, and it actually takes effect, along with an additional 10% goods or a tariff on goods from China. So, like, these tariffs have started to take effect a month later. The day after that, he grants a 1 month pause on tariffs for automakers from Canada and Mexico. Literally the next fucking day. The day after that, he exempts other products covered by the USMCA trade agreement from the tariffs. Then on March 12th, a week later, he announces a 25% global steel and aluminum tariff that takes effect. And Canada responds with some retaliatory tariffs, which is a theme throughout all of this, right? End of March 26th, he announces a sweeping 25% tariffs on all foreign-made cars and auto parts that will take effect on April 3rd. On April 2nd, he announces his baseline 10% tariff on all imports from all countries, with higher tariffs on certain countries, and this will go into effect on April 5th. The next day, April 3rd, he, in response to all these tariffs and this tariff announcement, our stock market absolutely plunges, and his 25% auto tariffs go into effect, and we have automakers stopping production at 2 plants in Canada and Mexico. And on April 8th, another 50% tariff hits China. On April 9th, he then raises that 50% tariff to 84%. So now China is at 125% tariffs plus another 20% fentanyl tariff. So they're currently at 145% tariffs on all of their goods, right? And then he announces a pause on the worldwide tariffs, just down to that 10%. So not like a bunch. He announced a bunch of like super high tariffs on a bunch of different places, and now it's just down to that baseline 10%, except for China. And so those tariffs are like paused for 90 days. And so, like, that timeline is just over 2 months of flip-flopping on tariff policy, like ramping them up, ramping them down, pausing them, restarting them, just like this totally insane, erratic thing, which has our economy like on the brink of our seat, or on the edge of our seat. And we'll get to it, but like that kind of uncertainty in international trade has costs. That is not fucking free. But one thing to call out as well, I think it's important to note that like when he paused these like super high tariffs on a ton of countries and went down to just the baseline 10% tariffs, that didn't actually help our tariff rates all that much. So according to Bloomberg Economics, the U.S. tariffs before the pause were on average 27% across all imports, right? Which was the highest tariff rate in more than 100 years. And then after the pause, it was just 24%. Still the highest tariff rate of the last 100 years. So like there was this big like reprieve in our economy. Everybody breathed a sigh of relief when he paused the tariffs, which had almost no effect because we still have this baseline 10% tariff rate, right? And at the same time, we have 145% tariffs on the U.S.'s single largest provider of international goods, which is China.
This is going to be one of the biggest I told you so moments because he campaigned on tariffs. He campaigned on across the board tariffs.
Yep.
He also campaigned on lowering grocery prices. And we kept saying over and over again on this podcast that the absolute dumbest way that you could possibly go about lowering inflation is through the use of tariffs. Because here's the point of tariffs, all right? The point of a tariff is to incentivize people in the United States to buy a specific product in the United States as opposed to importing it, all right? The way that that is incentivized is that there is a tax that the importer, not the exporter, the importer has to pay in order to receive goods.
So when CVS imports tchotchkes, they pay the tariff on the tchotchkes that they import.
Exactly. Now, in some cases, targeted tariffs might actually make sense. If you are trying to somewhat, manipulate the free market a little bit, which, by the way, obviously, the Republican Party of free markets.
Yep.
If you wanted to try to manipulate the free market a little bit.
Yeah, things like if you want to help a new industry start in your country.
Exactly.
You might put in tariffs to they're going to have higher costs when they first start out, so you're going to tariff other goods to temporarily help it start.
Yeah. Exactly. And sometimes that does make sense. Targeted tariffs can make sense. This isn't to say that tariffs are never a good thing.
Yeah.
That tariffs can never be a good thing. We're not like Mitch McConnell, who just on principle doesn't believe in tariffs.
But yeah, and there are other reasons why you might want to have tariffs as well. Again, if you have national security reasons, right? If we wanted to bolster, microchip manufacturing, like the Chips and Sciences Act, which they gutted. That would be a very reasonable way to do it. Now, the way to establish or support a new industry, if the goal is increasing manufacturing capacity, which is ostensibly their goal, right? They want to bring back American jobs. And for some reason in Trump's mind, American jobs, the only jobs he thinks are real jobs are working on a factory line or something like that, which I guess makes sense because he wants everybody just to work for him and his buddies. But if they're trying to bring back jobs, tariffs is one blunt tool you could try, right? Although there's really no good economic evidence that they're actually good at bringing back jobs in industries that have left.
Well, so that's the other thing we got to understand. Well, first off, one thing that we need to understand is that the entire point of tariffs is to raise prices.
Yes.
So to say,
So
when he was campaigning on lowering groceries and also campaigning on tariffs, we were trying to tell you, dude, the point of tariffs is to raise prices.
Yeah. The amount of time that we have been ringing this bell.
that's the type of shit that just exacerbates inflation. And the thing is, he kept saying, oh yeah, well, we're going to do tariffs in order to raise revenue. Here's the other thing. If you are raising revenue with tariffs, that means that the tariffs aren't working.
Yes.
Because the point of the tariff is to create a disincentive to pay the tariff, which means that if people are still paying the tariffs, they're still buying the goods.
Yes.
Which means that they're not working.
Yes.
So either they're working and they're raising prices, or they're not working and they're raising revenue.
Yep.
And it's so stupid.
And to your point, they raise prices in any case. It is required that they raise prices no matter what. Because the theory is that eventually in the long run we get manufacturing capacity or whatever. Yeah. But that is not, I repeat, definitely not what is going to happen in this case.
Yeah. And one thing that we need to understand is that in order for a tariff policy to successfully bring jobs back to the United States, you have to create the infrastructure necessary
Exactly.
in order to actually have those jobs, meaning you need to start creating factories. You need to have factories. You need to have ways of actually sending those goods, of actually transporting those goods. And in fact, there have been various cases in which factories that had previously been planning on being set up actually delayed being set up because of the tariffs, because in order to set up those factories, they relied on imported goods. And now
Yep.
they can't afford to set up because of those because of the cost of imported goods. So it's actually like it's doing the exact opposite.
Yeah,
of
dude.
what-
Not only is it doing the exact opposite, and it will continue to do the exact opposite. I'm about to walk you through exactly why I think that's the case. This if these are not like fully reversed, right now they're on like this temporary reduction, which is only like a net 3% reduction on an average import like tariff rate, but still, if these are not like fully reversed, this will lead to a total economic tailspin. And I'm going to tell you why. So one thing that you would assume one thing the stock market is good at is ingesting a lot of information and reflecting it out as prices, right? That's what like market efficiency theory is. The belief that if we have literally thousands and thousands of really well-educated people all bidding on these different stocks, right, based on how much they think it could be worth, will reflect kind of the wisdom of the crowd in what the stock price is doing. And so if they thought that manufacturing were going to return to the United States, and these are people that are experts in all of these industries, then the stocks of manufacturing companies in the United States would go up because there would be more value for those manufacturing companies gaining market share and selling a lot more goods and generating a lot more value. But no one thinks that. So there's good evidence just in the market right now, right, that it's not going to happen. But the other thing is that it can't happen. And it has to do with the interaction between trade and inflation and monetary and our old friend monetary policy. So here we go. Let's think about this. We already have inflation that is relatively high but stable. Tariffs will increase the cost of importing goods. It is by definition what is going to happen. That will be reflected in the marketplace as inflation in costs. So inflation will go up. And in order to respond to that, the Fed has one blunt tool to fight price hikes, which is the cooling down of the marketplace by raising interest rates. What happens when you raise interest rates? Borrowing becomes more expensive. How do manufacturers, right, build new facilities and manufacturing capacity? They borrow money. And so it is more expensive for manufacturers to borrow money to build facilities to generate the capacity that Trump is claiming that he is attempting to generate. And so we are creating this cycle where the tariffs will literally prevent us from even building the capacity that we might otherwise have built because it will be more expensive to make investments. Not only that, it will be because it's going to be more expensive to run companies, because they will not be making more profits, right? Because the cost drivers here will be costs for them that they're passing on to consumers. Everybody's costs will go up. So these companies will be making less profit and it'll be more expensive to borrow money. As a result, they will lay off workers to reduce cost. So combine rising inflation with rising unemployment and an economic contraction, and you get the economists, like one of the economists like most feared scenarios, which is called stagflation. You basically have no tools. We literally do not have any tools that can resolve stagflation, because stagflation is that combination where prices are going up, but people are getting poorer at the same time. And there's no path to economic growth that can pull us out of that tailspin. And our government has no tools to fix stagflation. It is one of the most stubborn economic problems to solve, and it will be present in the upcoming recession, which literally, unless these tariffs are reversed, I think is like pretty much inevitable at this point. And on top of that, there will be no like building of manufacturing capacity that drives growth to get us out of it.
And to make matters worse, for all of the people that are going to be caught up in this, the everyday Americans, let's also not forget the Trump administration is gutting all of the programs, all of the social welfare programs that are supposed to help people down on their economic luck. And there's going to be a fuck ton of people that are going to be down on their economic luck within, like, once that stagflation hits.
Totally.
It is going to get really, really bad really quickly. And the thing is, so part of the justification for this tariff is based on a study that was done by a bunch of researchers. One of them was University of Chicago economics professor Brett Neiman, who basically published a research paper about trade deficits around the world. But what's funny is that Professor Neiman actually came out and basically said, this is not what I fucking meant.
Yeah.
You completely misread and misunderstood all of my points. And the guy that Trump actually cited as justification, that the Trump administration actually cited, he is actually advocating for them to basically get rid of all tariffs, like get rid of all of these tariffs. So basically, one of the ways in which the Trump administration calculated the specific tariffs for various different countries was that they not only took into account the tariffs that they had on U.S. goods, but they also took into account the trade deficit, which is not the same thing as a tariff. In fact, it's a completely different thing. So basically, a trade deficit is when the value of the country's imports is greater than the value of its exports. Now, that might sound bad. Like, it might sound bad that, we're the idea that what we are importing, what we are taking in, is more so than what we are exporting. Like, we are taking, like, we're giving them more money than we are getting from them. Mm-hmm. But the thing that's important to note is that it really depends on what you're actually importing. Like, it depends on the actual resources, because there are some resources or some imports that we might be getting from another country that we just can't get. We're just unable to get. And perhaps that means when we're looking at the final monetary value that we are giving them in monetary value more so than they are giving us. But sometimes, sometimes we need that.
Yeah, totally. We don't grow bananas.
Exactly.
Or really any substantial amount of coffee or vanilla or like any of these, and we don't make shoes. Like, they're just, these are not jobs or not climates that we can grow this shit in, and not jobs that America's fucking want.
Yeah. So the idea that a trade deficit is evidence of these countries trying to fuck us over, a trade deficit is just evidence that the value of what we are getting from them is more than the value of what they are getting from us.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. It's
Totally.
not some nefarious scheme. To include that in your calculations is fucking idiotic.
Especially, it's so fucking idiotic to call that a tariff.
Yeah.
Like, it's literally unrelated.
Yeah.
It's totally absurd. Yeah. Yeah. The fact that was their justification, the fact that our president went on fucking TV to fucking talk about that, Oh my
Yeah.
God, that's so fucking embarrassing.
Yeah. Like the fact that again, I've said this before, but the fact that two idiots with a podcast
Yeah.
have a better understanding of basic ass economic concepts because, we took a 7th grade civics class. Okay, we took more than that.
Yeah,
maybe.
I've taken a
like,
lot of classes.
yeah, me too. But this is like
Yeah.
how tariffs work is shit that we learned in like that.
Yeah.
That's shit that we learned in 7th grade civics class.
Yeah.
All right. You would have to, in order to understand generally how a tariff works, all you would have to have done is just take a 7th grade civics class.
Yeah.
The fact that we know more about this than the fucking president of the United States is just sad.
Yeah, totally. And that's the thing. So this economic recession, which is likely to come, is going to hit us all really hard. Like we saw in response to these tariffs, we saw historic sell-offs from the stock market. And like, I think it's worth asking, like, why should we care if the stock market is going down, aside from if you personally have assets? And like, I think it's because the reality is, 61% of U.S. adults own some kind of stocks, which like means that, like, aside from it being an indication, a very good indication of what the future will hold, which is basically that the U.S. economy just got way less valuable, which is bad for all of us. It will hurt people's wallets. And aside from that, 80% of equities are held by retirees. So there are people that will need to liquidate this stock to support their lives. Your parents or grandparents are going to need access to this money that they will now be significantly less like they'll be significantly less wealthy and less able to take care of themselves. There will be reverberations of this will hit every corner of our lives and the economy.
Yeah.
And Republicans in Congress could stop it anytime they want.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think we also do need to address real quick, like, because we have talked about in the past that, yes, the stock market does have an impact on everyday people, but we've also talked a little bit about how when the stock market is doing extremely well, that's usually not as much of an impact, like not as much of an indication on how the average American is doing as much as it is an indication on how the wealthiest Americans are doing. However, because we live in a fucked up system where the rich always find ways to privatize the gains and socialize the losses, when the market does drop, everyday Americans feel it.
Yeah.
When it's booming, sometimes we feel it a little bit, but not a huge amount. But when it drops, we really feel that.
Yeah.
All right, that really starts to affect our lives. And one question that I think we also need to be asking ourselves, and perhaps this is giving Trump too much credit, but one question we should be asking ourselves is also, could this be a part of an insider trading scheme? Like, that is one of the things that some Democrats have been asking recently.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think that it is worth considering. Okay, so he makes the announcements for of the tariffs. The stock market plummets, which means that anybody who bought stocks during that plummet bought them for pretty cheap.
Yeah.
But then he announces that he's actually going to that he's going to put a pause on it. And as soon as he announces that pause, stock market shoots up again. It doesn't fully recover.
Yeah, and it's dropped down a fair bit since then.
Yeah. But it does
if you
recover
knew
a
the
bit,
timing,
which means, if you knew the timing, if you bought it during that plunge and then you sold it when it went back up, you just made a shit ton of money.
Yep.
And so, one thing that AOC actually recently asked in a tweet was basically any members of Congress that bought stocks within that 48-hour period should immediately disclose that.
Yeah.
And look, that this is one of the reasons why sometimes it's really difficult to try to suss out the motivations of the Trump administration, because Donald Trump is an amazing mix of being supremely stupid and also supremely corrupt.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. All right. Sometimes it's hard to tell, okay, Did he do this because he is actually stupid enough to think that this was a good idea for the economy? Or did he do this because he got a fuck ton of money from billionaires for his campaign, and he's a billionaire himself, and he, his kids, he has a family that could have potentially taken advantage of this.
Yeah.
If given knowledge, because the thing is, like, he can plunge the stock market with a tweet, and he can repair it with a tweet, or
Yes.
at least partially repair
Which
it.
is supposed to be illegal.
Yeah. So that's a question. Is this market manipulation? I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it absolutely is. I'm saying that is something that should be considered.
Yeah. And Senator Adam Schiff from California sent a letter to the White House Chief of Staff and the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, requesting that they, quote, conduct a, quote, an urgent inquiry into whether President Trump, his family, or other members of the administration engaged in insider trading or other illegal financial transactions informed by advanced knowledge of non-public information regarding his change to tariff policy, which is exactly what should be investigated.